Welcome to the Self-Publishing Experience, the quarterly podcast about indie publishing from the team at Troubadour Publishing. Here are your hosts, Stephanie Carr and Jeremy Thompson.
Welcome to the first of our new Troubadour podcasts, which is all about the world of books, ebooks and audiobooks. I'm Jeremy Thompson, Managing Director at Troubadour, and I'll be co-hosting each podcast edition with Stephanie Carr from our digital department.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. We're really excited about this as it allows us to talk to so many of our great authors about their experiences with self-publishing and writing their books, as well as looking at all sorts of things in the publishing world that will have an impact on all different kinds of self-publishers.
It's also good timing because we're just coming into spring as we record this, and things will rapidly start to pick up in publishing as we hurtle speedily towards the summer months.
So, for those listeners who don't know Troubadour, we're a UK independent publisher and we offer several different routes to publication for our authors. Firstly, we run the Matador self-publishing imprint, which last year was actually ranked as the best self-publishing company in the world above Amazon by the Independent Publishing magazine.
Which was also very, very unexpected.
But well deserved.
Very nice to receive.
And we also run the annual self-publishing conference at the University of Leicester, which this year is in its 7th year.
Yeah, Troubadour, we also run the Book Guild, which many of you will have heard of. It's a separate publishing company that we under which we offer both mainstream and partnership publishing solutions for authors. On top of that, we run Indigo, which is an online author services company for indie authors who want help with just parts of the publishing process. Maybe you need a cover design for your Kindle book or a copy editor of your manuscript. And most excitingly, last year we took delivery of the Troubadour Festival Bookshop. And that's a 1966 Citroen H van, which we've had specially converted into a bookshop, a mobile bookshop, that we take around to festivals, fetes and the like, so that we can sell our books direct to readers. And just coming into spring, we're just about to take that onto the road. Very exciting.
Really not sure how we managed to fit it all in sometimes.
No, it does seem to be a little bit busy at times, doesn't it? But anyway, look, that's a roundup of who we are and of what we do. So if you want to learn more, please do visit our website at troubadour.co.uk. So let's have a look at what we have in store in this edition of the Self-Publishing Experience podcast.
In a moment, we'll be talking to Alexa Davis about the most common mistakes authors make when marketing their book. And then we'll be hearing from one of our authors, Andy Donaldson, about the process of designing the cover for his new book, Raintown.
And then, almost as if we'd planned the podcast, we're going to hear from the head of production at Troubadour, Chelsea Taylor, and she's looking at trends in commercial cover design that are taking place in bookshops at the moment.
And then moving on from that, we'll have a roundup of publishing news and different news, bits and bobs that may be of interest to our authors, plus an interview with author Iain McCoubrey about his new biography, Healing in His Wings.
And finally, we're going to look at the growing audiobook market, and we'll listen to an extract from one of our recently published fiction audiobooks. Now, we know from experience at Matador that marketing is one of those areas where a lot of authors find great difficulties. Many authors tend to spend a lot of time focusing on the minutiae of producing the book, but often at the expense of marketing. Now, I'm joined by Alexa Davies, who works in the marketing department at Matador. Tell me, what sort of are the common things that authors tend to overlook when they're looking at marketing their book?
So as you say, it's something that doesn't necessarily come naturally to self-publishing authors. They're very good at writing and they're very good at knowing what they want the end product to look like, but they don't necessarily know how to then get that product out to readers. I think one of the biggest mistakes authors often make is not thinking about the marketing until the very end of the process.
Do you think a lot of authors leave it far too late then?
Yes, yeah, they definitely do. It's easy to become so wrapped up in the writing and then the editing and then the proofing and then cover typesetting and all that side of things that you just, it's not necessarily the first thing on your mind when you're producing your book. But actually it's really important to start thinking about marketing as early as possible, because it's knowing who your audience is that's going to make the book sell. So if you know who you're selling it to when you're writing it, you can tailor the story, you can tailor the cover design. So yeah, thinking about as early as possible is a good
that sort of tallies really, because at the London Book Fair that we exhibit at every year, we always get authors from self-publishing authors who come to us and they've published the book, but then they really haven't thought about how they're going to market it, and it's almost, presumably that's too late. The horse has bolted, as it were.
It is, yeah. So especially if you're looking to get the book into the book trade as well, they work months and months in advance. So if you're approaching them after the book's already out, they're not going to be interested. They're looking for forthcoming titles. They're not looking for something that's been out for a couple of months. And it's the same with the media side of things as well, and bloggers. They will always be interested in something that's upcoming, and if you're trying to market a book after it's already been published and produced, it just is a lot more difficult. So pushing it early and thinking about it right at the beginning of the process is definitely advisable.
Do you think that a lot of authors have quite unrealistic expectations of what is going to happen with their book once it's released? I mean, I get the impression that quite a lot of authors sort of assume that once their book has hit the bookshops or it's released, everybody's going to go wild and suddenly it's going to fly off the shelves. I mean, and that's really not realistic.
It's not. I think it depends on the author. There are some authors who write their book and they'll get it self-published because they just want to hold the product at the end of the process. But yeah, we do get authors quite often who'll come along and they'll expect sort of a wave of media coverage and loads of reviews, and they'll sell out their first print run within a month. And it's just not realistic for every author. It can happen, and it does happen. But in most cases, it's important to think about what you're actually going to achieve with the book. So whilst you might not hit the #1 spot in the bestseller ranking, you might get reviews from readers who have really loved the book. And it's about sort of thinking about what you want to achieve at the end rather than aiming high and then being disappointed if it doesn't happen for you.
You mentioned earlier about an author knowing their audience. I mean, tell me a bit more about that. How is that going to help an author market their book and market and sell their book?
So the competition with books is so huge. There's new books being published every day from sort of the big mainstream publishers. There's people doing it by themselves. There's people going through places like Matador. But reviewers are getting hundreds of books sent to them every month. So you need to make yours stand out from the crowd. And one way of doing that is identifying who's going to be interested and then tailoring your approach to that audience. So if you've written a historical fiction book, approaching bloggers who cover that genre in particular is going to help you get to the right reader. Whereas someone who's interested in, say, science fiction isn't necessarily going to be interested. So you don't want to be targeting everyone with a blanket approach. You want to be sort of looking at how you're going to reach the people who are most interested in your work.
One of the hardest things to do is to market a book where the author thinks that everybody is their audience. And I know, and I think you'd agree that simply isn't the case.
It's not. No author is ever going to appeal to everyone. Even people like Lee Child, he's not writing for people who love a romance, but his publishers will go out and they'll market to the audience. It's a lot more difficult if you're assuming that everyone's going to love it, because it's just not the case. And again, it links back to unrealistic expectations. If you think everyone's going to love your book, it's just not going to happen. But if you're able to sort of identify who will love your book and target them, you're likely to find much more success, and it's going to be more worth your time, and the results from it are going to be more helpful for you and your book in the long run.
There is a skill to writing good marketing copy that will help sell a book.
Writing marketing copy is an entirely different thing to writing a book, because you've got to be persuasive, you've got to be sort of alluring, you've got to make the reader want to read the product rather than telling them everything that happens. I'd say marketing copy is less descriptive, it's more action based. So if something happens, you shouldn't use a million adjectives to describe a character in a description. It's about cutting it back to sort of the bare minimum. And one really good way of testing whether what you've written is suitable for a blurb or for a press release or anything like that is by testing it out on your readers again. Also, another good thing to do is to go into bookshops and have a look at a blurb and just familiarise yourself with.
I think that's a piece of advice that I would give to all authors at all stages of writing, marketing,
absolutely.
Whatever their book is. Go into a bookshop and look at more books and read more books. One of the things I know that a lot of authors who self-publish pay very little attention to is actually possibly what they consider to be the most dull subject in the whole world, which is metadata.
Metadata is one of the most important parts of a book. It's basically sort of the title, the ISBN, everything that you need to put into a system to make the book visible. So if you're not having precise metadata, if you're not uploading it to all the relevant places like Nielsen in a timely manner, then your book isn't going to be discoverable to a reader. You need to get that right. It's not the most exciting topic and it's not the most fun to do, but it is the key aspect that you need to get right. And there's no point in producing a beautiful book if no one can find it anywhere.
So really, to summarise what you've said, authors need to think well in advance for their marketing. They mustn't leave it too late. They ought to have realistic expectations about what the marketing their book is likely to achieve. They really need to know their audience, presumably so that they can market better and more accurately their book.
Yeah, and more creatively as well. If you're a children's writer, you're going to market your book in a really different way to if you're a thriller writer. So.
Yeah, I mean that's a really important point because there is no one size fits all of marketing. No. It's got to be done for the book and for the audience of the book. Good advice there from the marketing department at Matador. Thank you.
Following on from that, I do think it's fair to say that a lot of authors struggle when it comes to the marketing side of self-publishing.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly an area that many don't give enough attention to, and certainly they don't give enough attention to it soon enough. It's actually it's always been the case that it's the marketing that actually sells the books, and to an extent, obviously cover design is important, but it's the marketing work that goes into it which really gets out there and sells the book, and too many authors do pay that too little attention. There are so many different areas that require so many different skills. We always advise authors to play to their own skills and get help with those things that they aren't confident with. So for example, if you are a designer, then by all means you can design your own book cover, but if you're not a designer, then you're going to need to get some help in with it. And the same comes with marketing, editing and all sorts of different processes in the self-publishing process.
And I think with all the help that's available nowadays, there's no reason for an author to have to struggle along on their own, and I think that's where kind of self-publishing comes in, is that an author still kind of retains all of that control over their work, but there is now that help available if they're struggling with a certain aspect.
And I think you'll find that marketing is something we'll keep coming back to again and again in this podcast. And moving on from that discussion about marketing, as we've just said, cover design, it's one of those areas that's vitally important and which most authors spend an awful lot of time on. Stephanie and Andrea from our digital department talked recently to Andy Donaldson, author of Raintown, about how he approached the design of his book's cover and how his self-publishing experience has gone.
What was the process of designing the cover like? Did you take the lead with the design?
I had an idea in mind, so we wanted it to be sort of at night with the fluorescent yellows and the moon in the background, but we got in touch with an artist who got the message straight away of what I wanted. So we worked together. It didn't take too long, but he really felt the same as me about what we wanted for the cover. I love the cover. It's better than I ever dreamed it would be. It's fantastic.
It is a beautiful cover. I love all the colours and everything on there. The design's amazing. So you're a teacher yourself. Were there any kind of experiences that you've had in teaching that kind of inspired maybe the main character or any of the storylines?
A little bit, I think. I mean, the idea was obviously to make people laugh, particularly kids. So as a teacher, that's something I think that you need to be able to do. I wanted to do something that was a bit... I mean, superheroes, in a way, they haven't got any powers in this. They are sort of normal people, and yet that idea that normal people can be superheroes in their own sort of way, and to people in their families, that was something that I was quite interested in. I mean, the whole idea behind it was just when I was reading books to my children at that age, we couldn't really find anything that made us laugh or related to sort of normal life. And I know this is about superheroes in a way, but it's again about normal people who play at being superheroes. So that idea of dads reading books with their children is quite important to me. And that was the main idea behind it, something that I could read to my children and we could both enjoy reading it.
So have they read any initial kind of drafts of the book? They
were the first people I went to. My lad, who, like I say, would have been about 11 when I wrote it, he was the first person that I gave it to. And he said he really loved it, but then again he would, because he's very loyal and he's very lovely. And my daughter read it too when she was a little bit older.
In terms of what you like to read, is there any kind of crossover there? Like, did you enjoy reading superhero books when you were younger, or is this kind of completely different?
Completely different. I did a lot of reading when I was young, but not really superhero.
In terms of the publishing process, are there any things that you've learned along the way that you didn't know at the start, how a book is produced, or is there anything that really made you think, oh, I didn't know that's how it worked?
It was all sort of new to me, really. So everything from the idea of print runs to the time it would take to things sort of working at the same time. So you would have marketing being in touch with you at the same time as someone else. But it's all been pretty seamless. It's all been very easy. There's nothing that's taken me by surprise.
What are your next steps then?
Well, now we've actually got a copy of the book, and I'm now going to turn my attention a little bit into starting to think how I might get involved with one or two book launches at places, social media as well. At the moment, because it's an e-book, one or two members of the family have read it, which has been nice. So they're starting to sort of tell each other about it. So yeah, marketing is the thing I'm moving on to now with it.
Raintown was published by Matador in March 2019, priced at $8.99 from all bookshops, and in ebook format from your usual retailer. I always find it interesting how different authors approach things like their cover design. Some authors have really set ideas about what they want in their cover, and others have absolutely no idea, and many have some ideas but they're not sure. But I also think there were quite a lot of common misconceptions about what a cover design should actually be doing.
Definitely. I think it can be a minefield for a lot of authors, and many of them tend to be far too literal about what they want to see on the cover. So they'll try to kind of include too much detail or tell the whole story on the cover.
I think that's true, yeah.
Exactly. But really, commercially published book covers are often a lot simpler, but more complex in execution. So it's a question of striking that balance there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And another thing that I've noticed is that authors don't really pick up on the fact that there are trends in cover design.
Definitely.
That publishers and booksellers, to an extent, booksellers are interesting because very often they set the trends by what they actually choose to buy from publishers, and of course publishers then see what's being bought and produce covers that are similar. So it's a sort of a symbiotic relationship. One of them drives the other and vice versa. Now I know that here at Troubadour our production department does work really, really hard at trying to spot those cover trends because it helps books to sell, but whilst us remaining inventive as designers too. Here's Chelsea Taylor. She's the head of production at Troubadour and a cover design in her own right.
It's important to keep a close eye on evolving trends in cover design, as it allows us to react quickly, ensuring that we stay up to date or on trend with the covers that we design. It really does give the authors the best chance of having their books stocked on bookshelves, so that's why we really take this into account here. It became increasingly clear throughout last year that the mantra of "don't judge a book by its cover" that we hear all the time is actually no longer applicable, particularly in today's market where social media is a massive marketing tool. It's ever on the rise and it's something that we need to react to. In a world where bookstagramming exists, book covers are becoming ever more colourful, bold and beautiful because they need to stand out in social media posts. We find it really interesting to spot trends coming through from designers and publishers, and we're always looking for trends that are actually coming back around, which we do see quite a lot. So here are a few examples that I've been thinking of where we've noticed this. 2018 was a massive year for floral covers and covers in which text and imagery interacted with one another, and this seems to be moving the way through this year as well. Covers like Heroine by Mindy McGuinness and Trust Exercise by Susan Troy are really good examples of how image and type can interact with one another. It just creates a beautiful design, so it's something that we keep an eye on. Another trend that we've noticed as well is a collage effect, so it's where designers will take out torn photos or paper or text and put them together in a way that will make a good cover design. One cover that we've done that on at the moment is Waves Aligning by Eddie Oro, but we've also noticed it on The Absent Hand by Susanna Lessard, so I'd keep an eye out for that because I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that. When we're looking at colour palettes, I'd say that yellow has been a massive colour for the start of the year. The paperback edition of Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney and Cow Parsley by David M.V. Spiller really do use this, but looking forward, I'd say it looks like teal and turquoise are going to be more prominent colours for the summer. One trend that we're loving at the moment and we're trying to bring through into some of our designs are pink in combination with black and white. So it's really good for crime and thrillers, and particularly for books with a strong female lead. If you look at The Woman Inside by E.G. Scott or A Date with Death by Mark Roberts, you'll see what we mean. It's just really good, and the contrast between the black and white and the pink really stands out. One other thing that we've done as a department is recently visited a printers where we went on a design trip. So we were keen to research cover materials and enhancements which work in a tandem with the cover designs that we produce. Cover designs are good when they're enhanced by different things that you can do with the printers, such as spot UV and embossing. But from our findings, it was clear that matte lamination is still the most popular for paperbacks with publishers. Unlaminated boards are also coming into the foreground as well. With unlaminated covers, they do have a really tactile, papery feel, which just adds an extra element to the experience of picking up a book. But you do have to keep in mind that it doesn't have that protective surface there, so it can mark a little bit more easily. So just think about how it's going to be handled and what bookshops are going to think of that. Going back to cover enhancements, it's very clear that foil blocking of all colours seems to be a major trend at the moment, featuring within all manner of designs and also genres. So you'll see it on historical fiction books, but also poetry books, so that shiny metallic foil looks great. But also we've noticed that there's a trend to have the shiny foil with a matte lamination on top, so it can sometimes create a bronze effect. So we use this technique on Iain's Circus of Redemption by Keith Blackburn, and we think it's really effective. For hardback books, we've found that single colour tinted end papers are back on trend, and it adds a simple yet effective splash of colour in place of plain end papers, and it's not an expensive thing to do, so it's something to think about if you just want to add that little bit extra. Sometimes it really is the simple touches that give a book that added appeal that will entice readers to splash out on another beautiful book.
So, here's a piece of surprising news for you. The UK's first short story vending machines have been installed at Canary Wharf. The machines will dispense 1, 3 and 5 minute stories for free at the touch of a button. They'll be covering different genres from sci-fi to romance and children's fiction, and the stories will also be by authors that everyone knows, so the classics, Virginia Woolf, Lewis Carroll, Charles Dickens, and the initiative is actually being launched with a specially commissioned 1-minute tale from Anthony Horowitz. And the initiative has really been launched, I think, on the back of research that has found that people were just not taking the time to finish books or not finding the time to finish books. A poll of around 2,000 UK adults found that 36% had given up on at least one book in the last year, simply due to lack of time in the day, and 30% had not finished a book in over 6 months.
I know that in 2017, I think almost 50% more short story collections were sold than in the previous year, which is an enormous increase.
Brilliant.
I mean, booksellers have been saying, I have to say, for years that the form is really popular, and that publishers, have been buying more collections in the recent past, and certainly more collections are being reviewed more than ever before.
I think that's brilliant, especially personally. I love reading short stories, but it seems strange because the resurgence of the short story as a literary form has been kind of mooted for years.
I know, and each year there are some great collections of short stories published, but some get noticed. Frankly, most don't, and most don't sell many copies. A commercial publisher, for example, publishing a debut collection of a collection of short stories, it may have a print run of around about 3,000 copies, and not much likelihood of being reprinted, and that's not really many in commercial publishing.
It's not.
It is a difficult market for self-publishers in short storage, and collections often don't sell well, despite there seemingly being a demand for the genre. And that's demonstrated really well because there are numerous online platforms for self-publishing short stories. Wattpad is probably the best known of them, but many authors often publish their ebooks in short story format.
They're definitely very, very popular as ebooks, mainly because it kind of fits in with the ebook kind of idea of being able to read on the move and on your morning commute. A short story can be read in 15 minutes.
It's very easily done and relatively inexpensive to publish an ebook.
Absolutely. So, moving on to copyright. Definitely not the most exciting subject for a self-publishing author, but there has been some good news from Europe that you may be interested in. Basically, there's been a revamp of copyright laws for the first time in around 18 years. And essentially, the laws have been rewritten for the digital age that we now find ourselves in. And the aim is really to protect rights holders on digital platforms, as well as kind of strengthening and clarifying the copyright laws that already exist.
Yeah, and one of the other consequences, and I think one of the other reasons for these new laws, is that the US tech companies will have to take responsibility for the content on their platforms. So anything from plagiarism to infringing copyright. And the laws will protect rights holders of works of art with new rules against intellectual property infringement. I think the downside, though, is because of the Brexit issues around Brexit, it's still a little bit unclear as to whether the UK will actually implement this new Article 17. It could be something that goes through, but it could also be something that we miss out on if the government decide not to pass it into law. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And it's something that a lot of authors are very concerned about, piracy and kind of
Absolutely.
illegal editing and sharing of their work.
Each year, the coming of spring brings with it a host of events that publishers and authors can attend. And 2019 this year is no exception. It's already shaping up to be a really busy year. And later this month, or probably around the time this podcast is released, it'll be the turn of the annual self-publishing conference, which is now in its 7th year.
And I know that Troubadour organises the conference, so I'm probably a little bit biased here, but I know that people who attend always tell me how inspiring they found the day, how useful they found it to kind of mingle with other authors, attend all the different sessions. And, I work in publishing already, but even I leave at the end of the day feeling really kind of motivated and inspired. So it really is a great event. There is another big festival coming up in mid-June, the Winchester Writers' Festival. It usually attracts some big name authors. So this year we've got the likes of Jasper Fforde and children's author Catherine Rundle, along with about 60 other speakers.
Yes, and one of those other speakers is me. I'm actually giving a talk on the Friday evening, which is entitled Self-Publishing Success, but it's basically going to be all about all sorts of aspects of publishing your own work. So if you are attending the Winchester's Writing Conference Winchester's Writers Festival, in June, then please do come along and say hello. And if you want to find out more about it and maybe even attend, then you can do so on their conference website, which is writersfestival.co.uk.
Did you hear that last week a non-profit lab backed by Elon Musk has said that it has created an artificial intelligence robot that can, wait for it, write by itself plausible news stories or fiction? However, it's apparently too dangerous to release because of worries that it could create so-called deep fakes.
Fake news.
Fake news. The robot, which has been created by OpenAI, has been named GPT-2, very catchy name, and it works using AI and statistical analysis based upon millions of texts found online to come up with its own stories, which sounds a little bit like plagiarism to me.
Yeah, and I don't really think many authors are going to have an awful lot to be worried about at the moment. GPT-2 was given the first line of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. It's a Truth, University Knowledge classic line, and it came up with. I have to read this. It came up with that when a nation is in a condition of civilization, that it is in a great measure the business of its leaders to encourage the habits of virtue and of industry and of good order among its people.
Not quite as
I can see you nodding off there at that point, but it's not quite as good as the original, was it?
No, I think I definitely prefer Jane Austen's version. There are so many different reasons why someone may choose to publish their own book. Jeremy recently chatted to one of our authors, Iain McCoubrey, about his recently published autobiography, which tells of his 30 years in the RAF and why he chose to publish.
What led you into a career in aviation to start with?
Oh, Lord, right from the very beginning, I found flying fascinating. Being up there, the thing people talked about when they first started flying, being able to see the other side of the hill. And I started, there's a photograph of me in a roundabout in air when I was 2 in an aeroplane.
Early start.
Early start, yes.
Excellent. And that presumably led on to an ambition to be in the RAF.
Well, indeed. I flew at school. I got a flying scholarship. I flew at University Air Squadron. I was reading medicine. I had a a spot where I had to make up my mind, do I carry on with medicine or do I switch? I decided to carry on with medicine but keep the flying going by joining the Air Force and then pursuing aviation medicine as an interest throughout my career.
So you were quite lucky, really, to be able to marry the two passions.
I think I was extremely lucky,
yeah.
yes.
One thing that did strike me is the amount of time that's passed since you left the RAF. What convinced you that now was the right time to write about it?
I think more reflection, perhaps even the passage of time and realise that you're not going to be around forever, but also clearing out the attic, you find the papers. And I'd always had this, one day I'll write my memoirs idea. And suddenly I thought, well, actually, maybe I should. And it was one of these things that it starts as an idea and it gets you. And suddenly I was at it all day, every day.
How close did you get as a medical man to actual combat?
Never closely enough is the answer.
Really?
One shouldn't want wars, but if you're in a fighting force, you want to do what they're doing. And rather to my horror, at the end of 30 years, I had never heard anything go bang in anger.
Since leaving the RAF, you've had a varied professional career, and some of which was spent as a magistrate.
Yes, indeed. I'd always been fascinated by that also. You can't, when you're in the service, there's no actual legal bar, but you just can't be released. So, and yes, I spent 15 years as a magistrate in Oxford, which was absolutely fascinating, give you a wonderful insight into bits of society you wouldn't otherwise see with my sort of background. It was very challenging sometimes, but very interesting.
So that's the subject of your next book?
Well, we'll see, yes.
Healing in His Wings, Memoirs of a Flight Officer, was published by the Book Guild in April 2019, priced at $9.99, and is available from all bookshops.
Now, in the past, we've all seen those audiobooks languishing on a shelf at the back of a bookshop. That small collection of dusty CDs of probably the mainly best-selling books. But that's now all changed with the rise of digital downloads. I'm joined by Megan Lockwood-Jones, who's Troubadour's digital manager, to explain.
Yes, well, I'm actually still a big fan of the CD, but mainly for music. But it's not really like that anymore for audiobooks. Audiobooks is a key area, key focus in publishing at the moment, and it's the fastest growing sector in terms of sales. According to the Publishers Association, in 2013, spending on audiobooks was around £12 million, but by 2017, the figures had rocketed to about £31 million, so it's quite a big difference.
It is the biggest growing area in publishing at the moment, and it continued since 2017. I know we haven't got figures for last year, but I know that everybody's saying that audio is one of those really, really big areas. And presumably that sort of explosion in audiobooks, it mirrors a little bit ebooks that happened a few years ago when that suddenly took off. Presumably that's been driven a bit by the sort of digital download model becoming much more accessible to audiobooks.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, people are always downloading things. They love streaming music or audiobooks. People are always on their phone. So the digital download, the instant access to audiobooks is something that I think customers really like. It's also driven by things like Amazon's Alexa and other virtual assistants as well. In a way, everything's kind of come together, made it easy and made it a more desirable way of consuming books in the audio format.
So bearing in mind that audiobooks in commercial publishing has taken off, has that really been mirrored in the world of self-publishing?
Yeah, definitely. We've had a big increase in indie authors looking at the audiobook format. I think people don't really like to be limited to one format anymore. They like to have the option. So we've got a lot of authors that have come to us that basically want to put that other format out there.
And I know that technically it can be quite tricky to get the recording of audiobooks right.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So the distributors themselves have quite a lot of strict requirements. Audible, for example, the main audiobook distribution platform, there's requirements in terms of the levels and background noise, even the length of some files. So it's something that we have to be hot on.
But audio must present some really quite interesting problems that you've not come across. I mean, I know you deal with ebooks a lot, but audio must give you quite some challenges that books and ebooks don't present.
Yeah, so we've got authors obviously have a lot of preconceived ideas of what it will sound like read aloud, and people actually reading it don't necessarily think about it in the same way. They might interpret things differently. So
I guess an author, having written the book, has the voice of the character in their head, and when that's translated into an actual audio recording by a voiceover artist, very often the two are different.
Oh yeah, definitely. We have had authors obviously that have got the exact pitch of that character's voice in their head, or the exact accent, things like that. So they're the sort of information we ask for before the recording begins. So do these characters have accents? One of our audiobooks that we did quite recently was The Love Detective by Angela Dyson, and one of the words that she told us from the beginning was pronounced in a certain way was the restaurant name. It's called Abe's, but it is spelled Abbes, so she did specify that it was pronounced more like Babes rather than Abby's. That's why we thought it was a good idea to give authors the opportunity to give those notes before any recording begins, because it helps the production process, so helps the actual voiceover artist, but also it prevents the author being disappointed when they receive the files if one of their main characters has been pronounced differently to what they thought.
So who was the voiceover artist that you used for The Love Detective?
So we used Gemma Churchill for The Love Detective. She's an extremely experienced TV and stage actress. She recently actually completed the acclaimed national tour of Nativity. She was playing Mrs. Bevan, but she's also appeared in on the TV in many shows like Emmerdale, Upstairs Downstairs, Holby City.
I have to admit that audiobooks is not a format that I particularly take it to yet, and I suspect that's the case with many others who love reading. I thought it might be a good idea that if we were to play a clip from a recent Matador self-published audiobook, maybe to try and tempt people to look again at the format and consider not only listening to audiobooks but maybe switching and publishing to that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a great idea. I got a sample together for you, so it's an extract from The Love Detective that I've just spoken about. So yeah, this is The Love Detective by Angela Dyson.
She beamed at me. I'm so glad you feel like that, because that's just where you come in, Clary. I shot her a look, not liking where this was going. Come in where? She pushed aside the last of her food. Look, you're not doing much, and I thought... Hold up, I'm a waitress extraordinaire, remember? She ignored me and finally got down to what I now realised the whole of this lunch had been leading up to. I thought you could nose about a bit, ask a few questions. No, I said flatly. No way. Oh, Clary, please. I really do want to be sure about him before I get too involved. You've said it yourself that I'm too gullible. This time it's going to be different, but I can't do it myself. What if he turns out to be the one, and I blow it by being too suspicious and pushy? That's why it's got to be you. Well, for starters, I'm not sure I believe in the concept of the one. It sounds rather limiting. And secondly, what do you mean by asking a few questions? She leaned eagerly over the table and topped up our glasses. Well, couldn't you pretend to be looking for a house or something? No, I could not. I've never even bought a house, and I wouldn't know where to start. It's ridiculous. Or how about a property developer? It shouldn't be that difficult. Laura, this is crazy. I haven't any experience with this kind of thing. Well, you were always good at drama at school, especially improvisation. That was 1,000,000 years ago. And besides, a few creative workshops acting out teenage angst with Sister Granger isn't exactly the perfect grounding to pretend to be a property whatever type person. But you can. I know you can. It'll be just like being a... She thought for a moment, and then, as if throwing down a trump card, said breezily, it will be like being a private detective.
I've actually just got into listening to audiobooks myself. It's not really been an area that I've gotten into, but recently, especially with the launch of our audiobook service, it's definitely been something that I've developed an interest in. So I'm really looking forward to listening to different types of content, especially kind of to and from work.
So that's all for this first Self-Publishing Experience podcast. We hope that it's been informative and helpful if you're considering publishing your own work.
Make sure you listen to our next episode, where we'll be looking specifically at writing romance fiction. But there'll also be lots of tips and advice about how to self-publish well and how to enjoy the process and make the most of it. So goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Experience. Learn more about indie and self-publishing at our website, troubadour.co.uk.